Hello and a warm welcome to the Federal. I'm Neelu Vyas. There's a deep concern over the draft amendment to the information and technology rules framed by the Ministry of Electronics and IT, where the government has said that if any content or news material which is deemed fake by the PIB fact check has to be taken down immediately from all the platforms. The Editors Guild has now urged the ministry to expunge this new amendment and initiate a consultative process with the press bodies, media organizations, and other stakeholders. But the million dollar question is that can the government determine the fake news? Can it really fact check? And are we not heading towards a press censorship? I'm joined by two very special guests. I'm joined by the managing editor of Boom Live, which is a fact checking website. Jency Jacob joins us on the program. Welcome, Jency, on the Federal. And I'm also joined by Raj Lakshmi Nair, who's a very senior journalist with a Frontline. Thank you, Raji, for joining on the Federal.
Thank you.
I'd like to begin with Jency. Jency, this new amendment which has been brought about, from the fact checking point of view, how would you really see this new amendment?
Well, Neelu, the whole day we have all been debating this and going through the repercussions of this. Since the time government brought in a unit called as the PIB fact checking unit, largely fact checkers have ignored them because, I mean, anything they did or anything they said really did not have any impact on our lives. Purely because as a policy at Boom, we don't quote PIB fact checking anything that they say as the government version, except for a few occasions when we felt that those versions were valid and they were credible itself to be taken up. At all other times, we make our own calls. We try to reach out to the government, speak to ministry officials, and try to get their views. Only then does it go as part of the fact checking process that we employ. Now, the government weaponizing an already existing unit which is appropriating the name fact checking and they've been termed that way, to weaponize them with the provisions of the law to make it mandatory that anytime they call anything false, publishers and intermediaries or platforms are all supposed to take it down. Now, this is quite a worrying trend. And I don't know whether these draft rules will finally be finalized or not. Most people feel that it will be because no discussion has been done. No journalistic organizations have been taken into confidence before the government has even gone ahead with it to include it in the draft rules as well. If it finally goes through, we need to see, are they going to enforce this? Does this mean that if suppose the scroll or the print or any of the mainstream media organizations as well, if they have reported on a story and there is a nuance to that story and PIB fact check comes ahead and says it is false because the government is denying it, which is classical old school denial, right? That the government always denies everything that is not in their favor. Now, if they insist, because the PIB fact check has called it false, the publishing houses or the news publishers have to take those stories down. And what they will ask the platforms to do is very simple. They'll ask the platforms to take down that story. But does that also mean that all the newsrooms also have to take down the stories published on their sites? Now, that's quite worrying. The fact that they're asking platforms to take down videos and claims or posts and tweets and Facebook posts. This has been happening since many years now. I'm not getting into that now, but asking newsrooms to take down stories only because some unit of the government, which is actually a publicity division and not even in any form any journalistic led initiative, on their say asking newsrooms to take down stories violates every principle that a democracy should be upholding as far as journalism is concerned.
Right. Yeah. But just to ask you, I'm just going to read a line from the proposal which has been floated by the Ministry of Electronics. And that line particularly says that the content marked as misleading by any other agency authorized by the government for fact checking or in respect of any business of the center will not be allowed on online intermediaries. Why I'm wanting you to clarify on this bit is that does the government mean that apart from PIB fact check, government can authorize any other entity or any other organization to do fact checking? How does it read that?
It does look like that PIB fact checking, because they are not able to take on the load that is coming in, the kind of claims against the government or criticizing the government, or even stories which are not in favor of the government. Maybe the government in its wisdom has thought that PIB fact check needs to be given more support, which means that that, and I've heard about some tenders being floated where they're asking for people to apply for taking over the job of fact checking, which means that, I mean, anyone, I mean, you and I can also apply for it, or
So
maybe,
it's
large
almost like
institutions can apply for it.
outsourcing the fact checking work.
Yes, yes. So maybe, they're asking, they may do that, and they may bring in people or organizations who will then be licensed by the government. Now, I'm not very sure whether this is actually going to be the case, but this is what I understand when I read that line in the draft rules. Maybe that is what they're attempting to do, which again is a very dangerous trend, because even if, suppose, large newsrooms decide, because there's a monetization aspect there and there is revenue there, that they should apply for it, it doesn't make sense, because what are you asking them to do? That is, suppose if any negative information has been published or something which is critical of the government, someone who's part of this fact checking exercise should call up the ministry and ask them whether it is true or not. And then what happens? What if, suppose, you're not convinced by the answer that has been given by them? That is what happens when journalists are involved in this process. But if government officials are involved in the process, they will be glorified stenographers. They'll take down what the ministry officials have said, and they will go out and publish it and say it is false. That is where
Hmm.
the layer of journalism is not involved at all.
Right. But looking at the monetary aspect, now I'll come to you, Raj Lakshmi. As
Yeah.
Jency was saying, looking at the monetary aspect, maybe journalists like you or me, would want to apply for this. But then what happens to the independence of media? Are we not saying that it's almost like muzzling the press? Are we not heading towards a censorship, which is not written clearly, but it's very clandestine, very discreet?
No, it's not clandestine at all. In fact, it's quite out there in the open now. I think they are sort of giving an institutional framework or a structure to what that intended all along. And of course, we had seen the signs of this come when the IT rules were first sort of brought in, in 2021 also. So so the government reserves the right to sort of block or delete content that they find, which may be sort of inimical to the sovereignty of the country or to the national interests of, the country, which is again, which gives a very sort of like a wide berth, for interpretation. And as far as the present rules are sort of concerned, it's actually silly. I mean, in a way, for a government which is going to host the G20 and which sort of projects itself, on the global stage as having arrived in terms of being uh, of being like a global leader. For it to sort of get its own agency, that is PIB is basically a Sarkari information bureau. So for it to sort of sit as some kind of an overarching authority, and to sort of determine as to what is fake, and what is not fake, is basically telling the media that we are going to sort of tell you, what to publish and not to publish, you know and so yes, it is a mockery of the freedom of the press. It is a kind of muzzling. It's a kind of an overt. Now it's out in the open. They're saying that we are going to do it. In fact, they're saying not only us, but we have the powers to authorize some other agency also. So whether it's A, B, C, or D, it might be one, it might be two, it might be 10 agencies today. That the government may outsource and say that these are the authorized agencies, and who are also going to do the fact check. So it's not only the PIB, but it will be some private entity also, which
But
which
Rajat,
yeah,
supposing we do not know whether these rules will sail through or not,
yeah,
given the fact that Editors Guild has also raised an objection today, maybe that the government is
mm,
open to that consultative process. But
right.
supposing if these rules sail through, how are the social media organizations or the news websites who
Mm.
do a lot of legitimate criticism of the government, how will those organizations hold the government to account?
Yeah. See, for instance, the government, at least, in a democracy, I do not think that one can make those categories as to, what is legitimate criticism and what is illegitimate criticism, because the government today says, "आप अच्छा भी लिखिए, आप हमको criticize भी करिए, but you also write good things about us." Now, this is a kind of a way of putting pressure, essentially. So there's nothing called, sort of legitimate criticism, if we assume that the media sort of has a role to play in public interest, and it is going to look at government policies critically, it's going to look at what the government does critically, it's quite possible that it might not be some things that the government would like to hear. Now, if you're going to say that that is fake, just because we don't agree with you, okay, you can disagree. The government is free to disagree. So it can say that we don't agree with your views, but then to say that's fake, it's fake, and that you have to take it down. It's entering into completely sort of different kind of a domain. Altogether. And in fact, there are as the Editors Guild sort of note also in the sort of points out that there are already inbuilt mechanisms to where kind of a self censorship, you can call it self censorship. Well, it's not exactly self censorship, but it's an inbuilt inbuilt technique by which media organizations, they do put out retractions, okay, if they have erred, and they have those mechanisms within. Now, to say that that it's fake, if you carry an editorial, okay, saying that I do not agree with this government policy. Okay, so is the government going to also say that your editorial line is wrong, and that's fake, just because it doesn't match with what we think, you know? So this whole issue about criticism, the right to critique in a democracy, it comes into question with this whole framework of what is fake and what is not fake news. If
Yes.
if a news is fake, and if it is leading to some kind of a malicious intent, or which has a larger import on society, at large, it creates disharmony. Now we have all those laws, to deal with those kind of news reports, and I think by and large the media in India is quite responsible. Is it has been
Absolutely.
responsible.
You can see, we all know, yeah. But you see, in 2020, we all remember News Laundry had done a couple of stories where there were instances where PIB fact check was almost like a government mouthpiece, and they were not on the side of facts, but they tried to toe the government line. So now the question is that how is the PIB fact check going to pick issues on which it is going to fact check, and what will be those issues on which it will simply ignore those issues? How does one draw these boundaries, and how will PIB do it, and will there be fairness? That's a whole question all about.
I mean, I'm not sure what is their process because we don't know who they are. We don't know who are the people who run this PIB fact check unit. I mean, we are assuming that they are INB ministry officials or some officials that have been hired for this process.
Yeah.
That's all that we know about them. We don't know anything else. We don't know whether there are anyone who with a journalism background there. Are there journalists involved in this process at all? Who are these people? What are the principles behind which they operate? Are they truly independent in any form? Anyways, just by the fact that they are part of PIB does mean that they are not independent in any form because they are, at the end of the day, they are answerable to their masters, and that is the government in this case. Now, how does one even figure out what is the line that they should tread on or not? Because there's no line. I mean, there's only one answer to this. That anytime there is anything which is highly critical of the government, they do jump in and they say that that this is not true. In fact, there have been some examples in that News Laundry report itself where they have gone ahead and called out ground reporting stories. How can you call out a ground report? Even fact checkers don't do it. Like, for us, the principle is very clear. If there has been a report which has come out in the mainstream media where someone has gone out on the ground and reported from the ground with voices from the ground, we will never do a desk fact check of that. In fact, we will only do a fact check if we have the capability of putting out a reporter who can go there to the same place and check whether that is true or not. Now, that's the principle by which we work under, and the constraints and the restrictions that we have subjected ourselves to. Have they subjected themselves to any of those restraints, any of those restrictions, apart from the fact that someone is calling them from the affected ministry and telling them that please put out a clarification? That's the job of a glorified press information bureau, or the for lack of a better word, a PR agency in this case.
Hmm.
They are a
Absolutely.
PR agency. Now you can call it fact checking unit, you can give it any fancy name. At the end of the day, their role doesn't change, and that is batting for the government, whether or not
But
the facts are
yeah.
in their favor or not.
But Jency, the voices supporting the government, and we've been on a couple of programs during the day also, and you must have heard the people who are supporting the government on this move. They are saying, what stops you from fact checking on what PIB fact check is saying? Now, it sounds very ideal and very utopian, so to say, in the present context. But is there a ray of hope through that premise?
No, no,
One
that
can
premise
believe.
doesn't. No, that premise doesn't hold if these rules go through. Because if PIB says that something is false, I mean, as a fact checker, I cannot go and fact check them. I mean, I can. I mean, technically, I can. I will go and fact check them. But will our story be up? According to the rules, even that has to be taken down. So there doesn't seem to be any. I don't think anyone has applied their mind, to be honest.
Hmm.
Maybe they have applied their mind in the wrong sense, because no one can make sense of this. How this is going to function? This is going to create chaos. In fact, not just us, but even um, you know all kind of newsrooms who probably are trying to toe the line of the government. Even they will find it difficult to follow, because just imagine, in any given
Right.
day, across all news publications, there are thousands of stories being published, both by their own reporters, via services, at least 4 or 5 news via services that every newsroom has. Out of those 1,000 stories, how many stories are going PIB fact check going to put out a rating? And if they do that, that is the only job that editors will have, taking down stories, because the
Hmm.
government will not like most of the stories that are critical of them. The other danger, Neelu, is that while it is very nice to stay in an ideal situation that you can go and counter it and can write a story, it doesn't work like that, because we've seen how newsrooms
Hmm.
function. The government says it is false. Most newsrooms, I mean, I'm saying 95% of the newsrooms will toe the line. you know just because we have a policy at Boom that we will not use PIB, that does not mean all other fact checkers have the same policy. In fact, I've seen many other fact checkers use them as one of the sources. But the danger here is that most
Right.
newsrooms will keep quiet, and they will say, oh, but the government
Hmm.
has already said it is false. Now what is there to go and counter them? That's the danger that we are in.
Right. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's really scary to say, but Jency, does it really bring an end to the honest fact checking industry, so to say? Uh, it's almost like a death knell.
No, it doesn't. In my view, it doesn't, unless the fact that that the government wants to be worse than China. I mean, if they want to, then they can. It's not a
Hmm.
walled garden. If you want to do that and you want us all information to be behind a iron curtain, then you really have to go the whole hog. You'll have to actually go out and say that that you're no longer a democracy. You
Hmm.
can do these things in piecemeals, but there will always be people who will oppose, newsrooms who will fight back, journalists who will fight back. And if you really want to muzzle their voices, then the government will have to take more steps than what they're taking right now. I don't think, I mean, and I'm trying to stay positive here. I don't think the government, in its, at least people who work with the government, there are, bureaucrats who work there
Hmm.
who will ever advise the government to go on this path. Because if they go on this path, then there is no point, there's no return here. And not just this, and as I've been saying through the day, this is a very dangerous trend that the BJP has started. Tomorrow they may not be in power. Tomorrow it may be another party, political party in power.
Absolutely.
And most political parties don't like to roll back steps that
Hmm.
are actually making the independence of or the free independent press that more difficult. If you look at history, they may say very different things when they are in opposition, but when they come back to power, they also like the same privileges, or they also like the same restrictions that the media has been put under. So it's a very dangerous road that they are driving on, and I hope that they make a U-turn as soon as possible. Otherwise, this is going to create chaos very soon.
Hope so, they do. And Rajashri, if I may come to you, so in the
Yeah.
name of fact checking, how do you see the role of the Press Information Bureau unfolding? Is it going to be really, like we say that Home Minister Amit Shah is sitting on a powerful position, so the Press Information Bureau head will almost be someone like Amit Shah? I mean, how do we see that? I can't even imagine before I ask you. But the PIP head is going to be someone very, very powerful? maybe someone who's going to be under PMO, and the kind of limitless powers they are giving to PIB. You've been covering the national stories for so long. How do you see the PIB office change from here on, if at all these rules sail through?
I think PIB and its and all its officers and its structure, I think they are but a cog in the wheel. I mean, I do not think that they are really doing the ideas come from their end. Or for that matter, well, it may have come from some higher end, but not from the administrative wing of PIB and the people who sort of are in charge of it. But but I think that because once it becomes a part of the rules, you see, so then there will be this punitive aspect also attached to it, because if you do not take down that that piece of news item that I have sort of deemed as fake, that I have decreed as fake, or an agency appointed by me has decreed as fake, then some punitive action will follow. It might, so it is the consequence of that which should be, which is not really spelt out, but it's going to come. It's going to come and come soon, in later. Now it is, so that's why it's important, I think for the media as a whole, to sort of resist this, and to say that this is not your job at all. PIB's job is not to sort of not of keep track, of news items that are critical of the government, and to sort of label them as fake. And if you want to put a counter to the news, you are free to do it. The government is well within its rights to sort of counter any news item that has come, that it does not feel that either sort of matches standards, or matches factual standards, or in terms of its own understanding, it does not match any standard. It can it and the fact is that PIB has been doing it earlier also. But I see that in this present government, this tetchiness, or this sensitivity to what comes out in the media is at a very heightened degree. And to that extent, we have seen all kinds of things happening. Raids in the homes of people who run online news portals,
Right.
in the offices. So it's happened, in fact,
So in the
consistently.
present form, so in the
Seen earlier.
present form, in the
Yeah.
present form of rules, Rajlakshmi, are we just going to see fact checking in the name of how PIB fact check will be indulging in salvaging the image of the government? No honest fact checking,
Yes,
at least in the
absolutely. Yes, absolutely, because that's what PIB has been doing,
right.
intermittently. But off late, it has really been told to, obviously, it's been told to go on a very aggressive mode. Therefore, any bit of news item which seems sort of remotely critical of government policy, whether it's to do with COVID, or whether it's to do with any kind of an intervention, you have this strong reaction as fake news. Arey Baba, why should you call it fake news? You can call it incorrect news. You can call it other. You can use any other terminology. But you as if you say it as if there's a certain agenda that
Absolutely,
sections
yes.
of the media has. In sort of planting these kind of so-called fake items, sort of discredit that media organization and also the reporter. So these things have to be resisted, Neeru. There's no other way. And I think now they've asked for feedback, apparently now, after sort of course, it's a draft amendment, but then they have now asked for feedback, and they have said that, people should write into them. They've asked for a public consultation. So I think many media persons in their individual capacities, as well as media organizations and journalist organizations, should send in something.
One last question, Jency, before we wind up the show. That is this time not ripe to start asking and also floating this narrative whether the government has the right to fact check? I mean, they started PIB fact checking in 2019 just before the COVID. But should the government be indulging in fact checking? And from here, where do you see the things going? Do we see the whole case going to the court, or do you see some kind of an amicable solution between the press bodies and the government?
The short answer is no. I don't think the government should be in the business of fact checking in any ways.
Jency?
They can,
Yeah.
they can always clarify news items that have come which are critical of them. In fact, I don't know why any government should feel that they have to reply to every story that comes out. Of course, if the journalists are asking for clarifications, I mean, feel free to do it, not do it based on what you want to do. But why should the government take every story seriously? They can always say that probably the journalist has not understood the issue as well as probably from the government's perspective they are doing certain things. There is a very democratic way of addressing this
Yeah.
and pushing it out. It's not as if the BJP-led government or the government in itself has any lack of avenues to push their views out. Social media has made it democratic. They are no longer
Hmm.
dependent on mainstream media journalists to take their view to the public. In fact, the Prime Minister himself has a large following. He speaks to the people directly. He uses his Twitter handle very effectively. The BJP party has a large machinery to counter any information which they feel is unfair to them. I don't know, despite all of this, and despite the fact that they have actually done a very good job in taking their agenda to the public, and why do they feel the need to do this? So the short answer
Absolutely.
is the government has no business to be in fact checking. And Nilu, as I said this earlier to you, nowhere in the world, even where uh, there are countries where democracy is in serious doubt, even in those countries, I have not seen something like this. And
Hmm.
journalists and fact checkers, when I meet them, they have asked me about this because this news has gone out saying that that the Indian government has a fact checking unit, and they have asked me, what does this PIB fact checking do? And why is it that they have called themselves a PIB fact checking unit? And I mean, I have no answer for it, and I've tried to understand from their perspective, how do they see it, and do they have an equivalence of it? And I don't think anyone has ever told me that they have the equivalent of a PIB fact checking unit where someone is called a fact checking unit. They have a press information bureau which informs and which takes on journalists when they feel that the government has been targeted. And I think that
Right.
should be the only legitimate way in which the government should be addressing stories that are critical of them.
But Jency, also in the absence of a proper definition of a fake news, can the government really say what is fake, what is not fake? So should not the preliminary thing be to define what is fake news? Shouldn't the
It's
government do
good.
that as a first step?
It's going to be very difficult. In fact, researchers around the world are trying to do this, and we do know that fake news as a term itself is very problematic. In
Absolutely.
2016, Donald Trump made it famous. He
Hmm.
weaponized that term against mainstream media organizations who disagreed with him, and he started calling everyone fake news. I mean, do you remember the time when he used to tweet out, "You are fake news, you are fake news, you are fake
Yeah.
news," just because someone that morning has written a story against Donald Trump,
Exactly,
and
his
which is why
critics.
yeah, and which is why, in fact, fact-checking organizations around the world have always been saying, and I agree with that, that we should not use the term fake news because literally what we are doing is that we are cutting off our own legs. Because fake news is used always against us as journalists. It's not used against people on social media who have,
Mm,
created a large following and they call themselves influencers of all kinds. It's not
Right.
being used against them. It's being used against us, and that is
Mhm.
what we need to be careful about. Not using the term fake news because I feel that term is extremely irrelevant. There can be incorrect news. A
Absolutely.
newspaper or a
yeah.
television channel may have actually put out wrong stories based on the reporter's wrong reporting and wrong sourcing. And there are very valid grounds for to take that down. And editors do take down stories. There's so many times. We've taken down stories, we put out corrigendums, we put out in the digital version of it, we put out an editor's note. And in fact, we put out corrections for even the smallest mistakes, that we find, and then we correct it. Where most news publications will not even bother putting out a correction. So there are good ways to do it. Now, I do understand from the government's perspective, they can say no, but that there are riots that are created, communal tension that is created. There are different
Mhm.
provisions in the law that they can use to bring that down.
Yeah.
Yeah, which in itself,
Absolutely.
many of them are draconian in nature. They exist, for whatever its worth is. So why do they need to actually bring this kind of a law where they will weaponize the government arm to tell news editors and publishers that they have to take a story down, or otherwise there will be action against it.
Absolutely. And I just hope and pray that some kind of a consultative process begins and the Ministry of Electronics and IT listens to people like Jency Jacob and Raj Lakshmi. Thank you so much. It was very wonderful
Thank
to
you,
have both of
Nilu.
you on the program. Stay tuned to
Nilu,
the
very
Federal.
optimistic, I must say.
Let's
The
hope. Thank
consultative
you so
process
much.
itself It may not be very consultative in the end.
I have no
Chalo,
hopes,
hope
Neelu,
and
because
pray
that should
that
have
it's
happened earlier,
positive.
not now.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
both of you, and stay tuned
Thank you.
for political news on the federal. Thank you so much.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more interesting updates.